St. Denis, France, the 12th of July, 1998. 72 minutes before one of the greatest sporting events in human history, a single sheet of paper landed in the hands of a FIFA official. And on that sheet, a ghost, a blank space where the most important name in world football was supposed to be. Ronaldo, number 9, the phenomenon, gone. In the press box, journalists scrambled. In the stands, 80,000 people adjusted their scarves, unaware. In newsrooms across Brazil, phones rang with the question no one had an answer to. What happened to the boy? This is not a story about a football match. This is not a story about a lost trophy or a tactical defeat. This is a story about the invisible weight that a world places on one set of human shoulders and what happens when those shoulders finally, silently give way. This is the story of a 21-year-old who walked into a stadium that night carrying the dreams of 170 million people, and how, hours before, alone in a quiet hotel room in the French countryside, something inside him simply broke. So understand what was lost that night. You have to first understand what this boy was. Not the icon, not the brand, not the commercial empire in football boots. The boy. Ronaldo Luis Nazario de Lima was born in Bento Ribeiro, a neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro where the streets were narrow and the dreams were wide. He grew up playing on concrete where the ball didn't bounce the way the book said it should, so he learned to control it anyway. He didn't read the ball. He felt it like it was an extension of his own heartbeat. By 1998, he was 21 years old, the age most young men are still working out who they are, and he was already the most famous athlete on the planet. In the months before the World Cup, he had signed the most lucrative sponsorship deal in sporting history. He was not simply a footballer anymore. He was an industry, a living, breathing economic asset, and he was expected to perform accordingly. But in training, you could still see the boy. The way he would nutmeg a teammate and turn to grin before the man had even looked down. The way he would try an impossible flick just to see if it worked. He played still like someone who loved it, like someone for whom the ball was never a burden, only ever a joy. What nobody could see, not the cameras, not the sponsors, not the journalists tracking his every movement, was the weight, an invisible weight building quietly every day. The weight of being the answer to every question a nation needed answered. The 12th of July, the afternoon of the final. The players had eaten lunch together, a quiet meal, the usual rituals that professional athletes build like fortresses around themselves before big games. Then, one by one, they returned to their rooms. Ronaldo returned to his somewhere in the thin, air-conditioned silence of that afternoon. Something happened that no preparation could have accounted for. His body said no more. Roberto Carlos, his roommate, his friend, described it years later with the careful voice of a man who had never fully processed what he saw, his teammate. The phenomenon, shaking uncontrollably, crying in a way that couldn't be stopped. A doctor was called. And then another, then the kind of quiet, urgent commotion that spreads through a building like a held whisper. They took him to a clinic nearby. Tests were run, scans were read, and Ronaldo himself would later say, with a kind of hollow wonder in his voice, it was as if the seizure had never happened, that he found nothing at all. Nothing, except that a 21-year-old had just looked into the mirror of the biggest night of his life, and his body had answered before his mind could. The official team sheet was submitted to FIFA without his name. Think about that for one moment. Someone, somewhere in the chaos of that afternoon, made a decision to list Brazil's starting 11 without Ronaldo. Then later, someone made a different decision, and his name went back in. Who made those decisions? Why? The corporate shadows were long that night. The logo of a billion-dollar company cast its outline across a hotel door. Officials pressed against glass. Men in suits consulted with other men in suits. A Senate inquiry would later ask the questions that no one wanted to answer and leave the room still full of silence. But here's what no document, no testimony, no legal proceeding could ever fully capture. The fear in the eyes of a boy who had just wanted to sleep, the specific, particular loneliness of being the most important person in a world that has no interest in your fragility. He walked out onto that pitch, let that settle for a moment. Hours after a convulsive episode, hours after being rushed to a clinic, hours after his name had been removed from and then returned to a team sheet, he walked out under the lights of the Stade de France in front of 80,000 people and 2 billion television sets and the full blinding weight of a nation's hope. He walked out. So, teammates who were there speak about his eyes. Several of them, in different interviews in different years, reached for the same word. Empty. His eyes were empty. He was present in the way a building is present, occupying space, but hollow inside. The cameras found him during the anthems. He stared forward. The Brazilian national anthem played, that anthem that can make grown men weep with its sheer, swelling beauty, and his face was still a face behind glass. The match began. Zinedine Zidane, twice in the first half, two headers from corners that Brazil should have defended, would have defended on any other night. But this was not any other night. This was a night when the architect of Brazilian brilliance was walking through the match like a man walking through water, like a man trying to remember the shape of a dream after waking. The final score, France 3, Brazil, a scoreline so brutal, so complete, that it seemed less like a football result and more like a verdict. And when the final whistle sounded, Ronaldo stood in the center of the pitch and looked up at the sky above Paris. We do not know what he saw, but we know what he carried. We know the exact specific weight of what he had been asked to hold, and the exact moment that weight had finally found the floor. The theories multiplied like shadows after that night. Nike had forced him to play, and the coaching staff had failed him. The Brazilian Federation had chosen commerce over care. The Brazilian Senate summoned witnesses, lawyers filed papers, editorials were written, and none of it, not one word of it, addressed the human being at the center of the story. Nobody asked, what does it cost a person? What is the actual lived interior cost of being made into a symbol before you are old enough to fully know yourself? Ronaldo was 21 years old on the night of the 12th of July in 1998. In another life, in another world, he would have been a university student somewhere, eating bad food, making small mistakes, learning privately who he was. Instead, he was the center of gravity of an entire civilization's sporting dream. And he was a billion-dollar asset in a yellow shirt. He was the answer to a question a nation of 170 million people had been asking since the last time they lost a World Cup in the terrible, echoing silence of the Americanette in 1950. And his body, on a quiet afternoon in a French country hotel, finally said what his voice never could. This is too much for one person to carry. So, they say he wept in Yokohama. They say when the final whistle confirmed Brazil's 5th World Cup in 2002, Ronaldo sat down on the grass and put his face in his hands. And that the tears came the way they had come 4 years earlier in that hotel room in France, except this time no one called a doctor. This time they were the right kind of tears. History will remember 1998 as the night France conquered the world. History is correct. But there is another story inside that story. Smaller, more important. The story of what it means to be a human being dressed in the costume of a legend. The story of what the world asks of its chosen few, and how rarely the world stops to ask, are you all right? Can you carry this? Is any of this fair? Ronaldo carried it. He bent, he broke. In a quiet room on a summer afternoon, he broke completely. And then, slowly, with the kind of patience that belongs only to people who have truly suffered, he put himself back together. Sometimes the greatest thing a person can do has nothing to do with trophies or records or moments that get replayed forever. Sometimes the greatest thing a person can do is simply refuse to disappear, simply survive the weight of their own legend, and find on the other side of the darkness that the ball is still there, that it was always there, waiting like it always does for the moment when the boy remembers how to play.